Citizens of football land, welcome back to the Badlands feed. It's Buck the Trend. I'm your host, Dan Estian, coming to you with a new episode as we get into London week. We got Jets Vikings coming up on Sunday. They got the early game on the other side of the pond. It's going to be very interesting to see how the Jets will adapt. Of course, we've had plenty of talking points. Folks have gone through a lot of analysis of the previewing the matchup. So we're going to get into a little bit of learnings from last week's disaster and just some patterns that have been kind of prevalent with this team since Salah has taken over. And it's just some things that they have to get fixed that are a little less, X's and O's focused and a little bit more mentality focused. And I'm not going to bring the whole culture thing into the conversation because I think from what we've seen, and we've talked about this on previous podcasts, man, the culture is winning or not winning. That's usually what culture is from team to team. I think it's too vast of a span in terms of what we tend to put under the umbrella of culture, and I think that for the most part, it's kind of these more isolated opportunities to be a little bit more mentally fortified or mentally sound that I think the Jets need to take the opportunity to self-reflect and improve on. So that's what we'll talk about in this episode is a little bit of a mental fortitude talk. And yeah, I will give a giant caveat. Obviously, I am not in an NFL locker room, and who knows what is going on in that locker room for the most part. We only know what is reported to us and what we can see from games. But what I love to do personally is use human body language, right? Like I have played football before, and getting a sense of what human beings are like, it's usually not too far off to just make conjecture and figure where things are landings, particularly when you think about stories from other teams who have won championships, other teams who have had stable locker rooms, other teams who have had unstable locker rooms, other teams who have had good coaching, other teams who have had bad coaching. You can kind of see what the trends socially, and I suppose mentally, where things fall apart and where things are fortified and stay together. And that's what I want to talk about. So I think with the Jets, a lot of what they've dealt with in this entire Salah tenure and before is just the purpose for playing, the purpose for being in the front office, the purpose of coaching. Those things get lost a little bit. And so I think obviously everyone should be playing to win a championship. But the reality is throughout the NFL, teams, not every front office, not every coaching staff, not every group of players are really playing with that, right? It's an assumption, right? You're okay. Everyone's really trying. For the most part, that's not true, right? Of course, there are teams that are tanking. There are teams that are trying to get good draft picks. But even the teams that are supposed to be competitive, there is kind of a line there. There's a difference between how you're approaching the game on a week-to-week basis. And I think that what the Jets need to get out of is this mindset of playing for it to not be your fault, or coaching for it to not be your fault, or GMing, being in the front office and doing your job so that it's just not your fault and not to win a championship. And there's a big difference there, because when you're doing things for it to not be your fault, you only care about the outcome for yourself, right? And you are willing to twist a bad decision, right, to be somebody else's fault, right? And it's not something you do consciously. It's not something it's not this evil mastermind thing and it makes you a villain, right? It's just it's a passive result. It's a passive or subconscious effort, right? And where you're doing things like, for example, we see Nathaniel Hackett gets kept around, right? In a situation where a lot of teams would have just moved on. A lot of teams would have found a different situation. A lot of teams would have been like, okay, like I know I have Aaron Rodgers and I know they have a relationship, but I know it hasn't really worked, and I know that they're not always on the same page. So I'm gonna just try something else, because even if I bring in somebody else, that person's gonna work really closely with Aaron Rodgers, who's been in the league for X amount of time. I think they can figure it out, right? Hasn't really been a problem with other teams. Sean McVay, for example, wasn't afraid to coach somebody like Matt Stafford, who had been in the league for a super long time and almost the same age as him, right? It's just like, yeah, come in, we'll figure it out. You're somebody else somewhere else for the majority of your career. I didn't have to bring over a Detroit Lions staffer to make this work. I'm gonna just use my brain, and we're gonna put our heads together, and then we're gonna make it work, right? And he's doing that with offensive assistants who are not even as experienced as him, or guys who have come from situations that weren't as good, right? We know that LaFleur's over there from the Jets, and he's doing a great job, right? And where he's coming from a situation where a lot of people are like, I don't know if he's ever going to work, at this level again. Now it seems like, yeah, he's probably gonna be fine, and he'll probably get an OC job again in the future, right? And so I think it's just a different mindset there. And you keep hacking around now, and every bad thing that happens on offense is his fault, right? And a lot of it is, yes, but I don't think Hackett's somebody who's like, hey, like, I can really do this, and you need to keep me around. If they fired him, he probably would have been like, yeah, I get it. Like, it hasn't been good. It has not been good, right? Another example, I think you hear a lot of the players passively aggressively complaining about coaching or about other position groups. There are a lot of like weird comments that came after that last game, and that was just still early on in the season, so you really don't want to hear that this early. But it's the result of past years, right? And like the players felt what the fans felt, which is this shouldn't have been like this. Like, that Denver game should not have been like that, because you put yourself in a position with Aaron Rodgers where you have somebody who's going to elevate you, and then you have an elite unit on the other side of the ball, and they actually dragged Aaron Rodgers down, right, to the places where they were the past few years, right? Because you saw, like, yes, he missed a couple of throws, and he wasn't at his best, but you just get a sense that, like, oh, instead of us rising to where he can bring us, we're instead bringing him down to where we have been in that last game. And I think that's why the players started to lash out. But in that, you can kind of see where the mentality is broken, right? It's the, oh, my position group did our job and everybody else failed, that type of attitude. That's a loser mentality, right? That's, oh, I'm just trying to do my job and I don't want it to be my fault. Again, like I'm saying, you got to get rid of that. It has to change, right? A championship mindset is, we lost. Like, the entire team lost. There's no, picking and choosing little plays here and there that, oh, I did this well, X did this well, blah, 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 blah. Cool. You're supposed to just do your job, right? That's the expectation. The goal is to win, right? You're doing your job is just a track on the way to the W, right? And so I think that's really what has to change there. Um, you see it with the front office being stubborn about roster decisions, right? Whether that's with Hassan Reddick or with Zach Wilson in the past, right? They could have moved on way earlier from that situation. I really don't give a damn what he's doing in Denver. As we can see right now, he's not playing right now. There's no way that could have helped the Jets. But you see what poor things, poor decisions they made in terms of keeping him around and keeping him as QB2 in the season, the first season with Aaron Rodgers, which was a mistake. Just so many poor decisions there where the front office could not just move on. And that comes from that same thing. You don't want it to be your fault. You don't want it to appear that, oh, I'm admitting that I messed up here, right? And so you selfishly say, like, oh, I'm going to push this a little bit further, and then it messes up the team, right? It puts you in a bad position as a team just because you needed to get that, like, personal or that, position specific, role specific satisfaction of trying to see this one thing go well, right? Or not admitting or being accountable to decisions that you've made that just haven't been good. Same thing is happening now with what's going on the defensive line. The weird situation with Michael Clemens, where it just doesn't seem like it just seems like they're not keeping him the same level of accountability, the same level of expectation of play that they've had at that position with past players. The weird divorce from John Franklin Myers, right? Still don't understand what is going on there. If you just don't like a player, okay, you're entitled to that, but you're not entitled to make poor decisions in reaction to that situation, which they just did, right? Michael Clemens and John Franklin Myers are like, there's a chasm between those two players, right? And the staff basically has, went into the season saying like, oh yeah, no, it's an easy replacement there, right? And that was very foolish, right? It was very foolish of the front office to think that that would be the same, right? Because the tape very clearly showed something else, right? And so if you're just going off of like, oh, I just, you know, hey, I know this is going to work, and I'm going to do my job. And then if the player doesn't play well, then look, I did what I did. You look pretty good last. No, everyone could see that that wasn't going to work. Just admit fault there and fix it, right? Same thing with, in the past with the offensive line when they try to take some chances there and it didn't work, right? A lot of people could see, hey, well before things really broke down, like this is a really big problem that needs to be fixed, and they took so long to address it. Thankfully, now the offensive line is so much better, but it just took so long to even get to that point, right? And so you hear, Joe and Connor always talk about half measures, and that's all coming from the same thing, and it starts at the top and it goes all the way down, right? It's that sense of it's just not going to be my fault that we don't do well, right? It's not going to be my fault that we're not winning, right? Instead of it being like, hey, we're going to win a championship together, right? And it's a really poor mentality, and the Jets really need to find their way out of that, right? I think the other point there is that they're a bit of a front running team. I think the coaching staff is bad at adjustments. That's been evident. We've heard, Connor talked about it this week. We've talked about this plenty in film rooms and things like that in the past. They're just not very good at adjustments, particularly on offense, right? The defense, obviously, they're pretty good at game planning in general, but the offense is just horrible at adjustments. And it takes them so long, so long to adjust to what the other team is doing. And that comes from the same thing, right? I'm going to stick to my plan, and it's just the player's not executing, and it's not my fault. You got to adjust. You got to put yourself out there and say like, hey, I'm going to try something, and if it doesn't work, I'm going to take responsibility for it. The players will play down the competition, and that's part of the same thing there. They're of being a bit of a front running team. Yeah, you saw that against Denver. Situations aren't going their way, and they just kind of crumble, right? And it's not what you want to see. The penalties and the negative plays, they tend to snowball whenever they start, right? And they just have a really hard time finding their way out of that. In the game where CJ Mosley got hurt, it took them so long just to even out, just to level out, right, on defense. And then on offense, you see the same thing. When things aren't going well, you're getting penalties, or Aaron Rodgers misses a throw or anything like that. The vibes just are in the toilet, right? And players just looking around like, who's gonna bring us out of here? Who's gonna bring us out of here? And yeah, it's you can't have that on a team that's trying to win a championship. You need all players to be taking full responsibility, and that's the irony there of it. Hey, it's not going to be my fault. It's not going to be my fault. It's not going to be my fault. Like if everyone has that championship mentality, if everyone is working towards the same goal, it's not going to be your fault. Like it's okay. And if you do mess up, yeah, cool. Let's say you're playing, your tail off against, a dominant team like the Chiefs or something like that, and you lose because your kicker missed a field goal. Your kicker has to take full responsibility because damn, that sucks. Like it came down to me and I didn't get it done. Like no one's gonna be like, yes, people are gonna get on you for a bit of time, right? But like if you're hanging with a very good team, no one is gonna hold that against you for the rest of your life, right? Like there's this like weird fear. And it's what bothers me about the whole culture with New York media. They're so hard to deal with and all this stuff. I think they're just asking you like, hey, are you doing your job? It really isn't that hard, and I don't get the like strange attitude towards it, and like the post games and all the annoyances. Like just do your job. Like yeah, a lot of times people are gonna ask really dumb questions. Okay, it's really not that hard to just like answer it and move on. And a lot of the stuff they invite on themselves by like being weird and passive aggressive and not really saying what's on your chest, and I'll get into a little bit of that, but I want to talk about what it looks like when it's good, right? And what it looks like when everyone is focused on the same goal. Because other teams have had way more going on than the Jets have going on right now in that locker room, right? Other teams have been dealing with a lot more serious things than what the Jets are dealing with right now in that locker room, right? And they were able to keep focused and stay on assignment and win championships. And an environment that Robert Saleh was in with the Seahawks during that like LOB era, they had a lot going on internally that we didn't find out about until later, right? Because everyone was just focused. A large portion of the team did not like the quarterback, right? They felt like the quarterback was receiving a lot of external praise. They felt like the coach was kind of lifting him up to be something that they were like, hey, like, I don't think it's like that. But hey, it didn't affect them until after they won all the championships, right? So you see, like, even the stuff with Marshawn's media availability, people worried, oh, he's being a distraction to his team, blah, 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 blah. And they couldn't even run with that because he wasn't. They were staying on assignment. They did not care what was going on there. Dealing with personalities in that locker room, they had the most incredible and explosive personalities in that locker room. And you just could never, it just never would rise to the point of being a problem, right? And I think that's a lot of that is where Robert Saleh gets his ability to deal with personalities in the locker room from, is how Pete Carroll handled those situations. But they just remained on assignment and they remained focused. And it resulted in great things for them, right? When everyone's kind of like dedicated to the same thing and focused on the same thing, like, it doesn't matter. Like, yeah, I don't like our quarterback, or he's messing up. Like, the game, he had like a ridiculous amount of turnovers and they still managed to win in the end. And he was like crying in the post game, that classic meme picture. Like, that game could have been very bad, right? That game could have really messed up everybody's psyche. But they're like, okay, yeah, no, he sucked and he played as bad as we, maybe some folks internally feared he could play. But they're like, no, he has to play well. Like, we have to win a championship. And so you just keep at it, right? You just keep on the same assignment. You keep everybody together. You keep working towards the same goal, right? And they just kept things together there, and it worked out well. And now, it's all over, and they don't talk to each other anymore. Like, for the most part, Russell Wilson and some of those older other defensive guys that have talked publicly about those situations, like, yeah, they might not have a relationship anymore, but like, they won, right? Because they're able to stay on assignment and keep everything together mentally. And again, they weren't like a front running team. They weren't like this team where everybody's like doing these like little quips and like holding grudges, or like, oh, it's just not gonna be my fault. Like, I did my job. All I did what I had. No, they just dominated everything in front of them together as a team, right? And yeah, it's just different. I think that comes from the front office as well. Like, did something work? Did it not work? Cool, I'm moving on, right? Like, don't take too long to put like, even in getting Russell Wilson into the lineup, right, early on, where he was honestly playing at his best in that young part of his career. But of course, again, like I mentioned, folks on defense had some concerns. But like, regardless, the front office is like, cool, yeah, we have this guy who's been here for a long time, and we have this rookie coming in. We're not really sure. Let's play by ear and see what happens. And they're like, oh no, okay, he's ready to play. Put him in. And they obviously made a ton of really great draft picks along the way, but they also made a lot of picks that weren't that great. But you don't really know about that, or you don't really think about that, because they made so many quick decisions and so many important decisions in that small time frame that got them to that championship level, because they're able to move on from bad decisions, because they're able to identify what's working and what's not working and just keep it moving, right? And that's how they built that incredible defense with Pete Carroll. And I think with somebody like Pete, he's not afraid of taking responsibility and being accountable for not doing his job. And it's why like, if you've noticed, like, with the media, there are things that have definitely been his fault, right, in terms of bad decision making, but they have such a hard time, like, in terms of giving him a hard time for those decisions because he's not against taking responsibility. He'll just do it. And then that's the end of the conversation, right? And you already know that he's a good coach and you know that he's going to get it right. So you're just like, all right, well, yeah. Like, what was the point of that? You don't spend all week talking about cadences because he'll just immediately squash it and just be like, nah, well, that's on me. I'll figure it out. Right? I don't want to talk about this other team, but the Patriots, I think, is the same thing. I will hate to admit this, but when they were winning, we didn't know much about a Tom Brady Bill Belichick feud because you just don't see it on the sideline, right? Um, even if it's like to the point where you're like, hey, cool, I'm just not going to talk to him and he's going to do his thing and we're just going to win, right? That's what it has to be. Okay, then that's what it has to be. Um, I think you saw they had a lot going on in that tight end room, but it didn't matter, right? Everyone just stayed on assignment. Um, Brady throws tantrum on the sideline, and that's actually like for some situations not the worst thing. Like I think in general, he's a bit of a he could be a bit of a diva, I suppose. But like I think it's why personally I want the low patience version of Aaron Rodgers, right? Because I think that that's a positive thing. It helps keep everyone accountable, right? And with those Patriots teams, like yes, Brady was annoying as hell throwing those tantrums on the sideline and complaining and trying to get calls and all this stuff. But like when he's throwing those tantrums on the sideline, the coaching staff has no choice but to be accountable to their actions because he's going to tell them to their face in that moment, you're not doing your job, right? And that's where things just need to be different for the Jets, right? And I'll get to that. But the other team I want to talk about, the Chiefs, it's the same thing. They've had a lot to deal with. Chris Jones' contract, Travis Kelce's dating life being a potential distraction, arrests, terrible graduation speeches. But they stay on assignment regardless, right? And even when some of those things have left them shorthanded, it's not just there's no selfish reactions or selfish behavior or mentality from anybody within the team that's just like, oh, well, the front office screwed us, so we can't get anything done, or oh, the coaching's not doing what I expect them to do, so I'm just what it's just whatever, and I guess we're gonna lose, right? It's not like that. And when you get like these things that, for example, Travis Kelce last year in the Super Bowl or last season's Super Bowl, basically being a 3-year-old with Andy Reid and yelling in his face and pushing him. Like, yes, don't push old people. Don't do that. And that in general is negative. But the good thing there is they just have it out in that moment and then they reset and then they keep it moving and then they win the Super Bowl, right? And it's better to just have it out in the moment and get your point across and communicate clearly than to like hold it in or like, oh, you just start going through the motions because it's not going your way. And then, oh, in post game, I'm gonna talk about it. In post game, or in this interview, I'm gonna go talk about it. No, like talk about it during practice, talk about it during the game, talk about it in the moments where it happens, so that you can get it right. It for some reason they don't have that, and instead everyone's just like, oh well, it's not my fault, and that's weak, man. That's weak. I think there's a few players within the Jets that have the right mentality. I think Aaron Rodgers does have the right mentality because he's won before, and you can tell that it's just within him, right? He's not going to badmouth situations where things are not up to standard, right? You'll never, very rarely hear him say anything negative about Nathaniel Hackett, despite the fact that he fights with him constantly every single day, right? But he's never going to bring that into public, right? The weird moments we had with the Caden stuff that's probably as most as you'll get from him being like, hey, do your job. He's just going to tell them that to their faces, right? We know that he does that. It's not a big deal for him. You need more of that. Quinnen Williams, he has that, right? People, and it's crazy because for Quinnen, people blame him for so much that isn't his fault, but you'll never see him complaining about that. You'll never see him defending his own play and being like, oh, well, I'm doing all the dirty work. Oh, I'm getting double teamed every play. Oh, I'm doing X, Y, Z. No, he talks about the team's performance as a whole, and his personal performance he rarely ever talks about, right? And I think that in terms of, the type of communication you need to have to be this like more mentally fortified type of team, that we've seen with all these championship teams. And again, I talked about the sideline tantrums with Brady, and I talked about Aaron Rodgers. Also, he has his own tantrums with Nathaniel Hackett. Quentin Williams had the same thing, right? He shut the whole outburst on the sideline when he's telling Ulbrich stop blitzing, and then it has an immediate effect. And the defensive line started playing way better, and they honestly kind of took off from there. You need to have that. You need to have players like that who are not going to just like take it in and be mopey and then go complain about it in post game. You need players that are going to say it in the moment. It has to get fixed now. Like you need that. You need that. You need that during the week, and you need that during the game. You need that. That's how good teams are, right? They get it fixed. And if you're not trying to be, and it's such a cliche, but like they don't have enough people that are trying to be part of the solution, right? They just have people that are trying to investigate the problems, which is where like folks like Badlands are. That's our positioning, right? And people in the media, they're trying to like figure out what's the issue, right? They know the issue. They should know the issue. They should know the issue, right? And so from there, you just try to be a part of the solution, because telling somebody else what the problem is not actually fixing anything, right? I think CJ Mosley has this mindset. I think Quincy Williams, he's not a the biggest vocal veteran leader, right? But he shows that consistency in his play, right? And we talked about being a front runner. He's not. Whenever they're down, watch him play. Whenever things aren't going well, watch him play. He's the same player the entire game, right? And you can count on him making plays when they're down. And so I think some of the big fixes that the Jets need, they need better accountability. I think Aaron Rodgers was saying something that is a large problem. And again, I say that I mentioned earlier, he's not going to very easily call out a member of the staff. Like that's about as much as he's going to call out the staff. And so that's how you know it's a big problem, right? And so as a coaching staff, right, they have to hold themselves accountable first, right? And then they can do a better job holding the players accountable. Because if they try to keep the players accountable and they're not keeping themselves accountable, no one's going to listen to them, right? Because that's not a real standard. That's not a real thing that you can hold players to if you yourself are not doing the job that you're supposed to do, right? They will not listen to you. And then I think on the other end, they need better week-to-week prep. A team that's well prepared is a confident team, and it won't matter who the opponent is. If you've done enough prep during the week, your team's gonna be very confident, right? And it just seems like they aren't doing enough because you're getting to points early on in games with again, for this season, it's a small sample size, but we've seen it in past years, right? You get into games with teams that you should beat. It starts off not going well. I talked about, again, being a front running team. When it's not going well, the play starts to drop. But part of that is because you're not prepared, right? And so when you reach these points where you're like, well, this is all they prepared us for and it's still not working, the play drops dramatically, right? And you can't have that. So you need to be better prepared during the week so that you can enter these games, you get to these moments, and it's not like nobody prepared me for this. Right? Instead, you're willing to fight through it because you're like, cool, I was prepared for this. I knew this was a possibility. We're going to fight through it, right? We're going to make adjustments. We're going to figure it out. It just seems like they don't think that any adjustments are going to get made ever. And then they're just like, I guess we're going to keep trying to run through this like same gap that we've been trying to run through the entire day. I don't have a lot of faith it's going to work. And then everything just kind of goes downhill. So I think they just need to be better prepared because, and part of this, again, I mentioned this earlier, I have to keep harping on it. Yes, you know that you have some deficiencies in your coaching staff. At this point, everyone in the league knows. So it's up to you as players to get it right. And I understand players are not going to have the same type of input that you get from a coach. But at some point, you have to have a little bit of pride within yourself and just change your mindset up a little bit from it being, oh, all I can do is what this person tells me, and I'm like, just don't be a bot, basically. If it's not working, say it to the coach, to his face. It's not working. It needs to get fixed. and we need to fix it now so that we win, right? It's not about it needs to get fixed because I'm uncomfortable, because that is weak. Like if it is, and that's what a lot of what like it seems like might be the case with some of the cadence stuff. Like if you're just afraid of being uncomfortable, fix yourself. If you know that something is not going to work because it's a game plan mistake, talk to the coach. Like I think in both cases, like players just need to have a better mindset around some of these things, right? Because it's not just suffering in silence and then having an outburst and complaining, oh, things weren't going my way and I'm uncomfortable and I don't really like how things are going. Nobody cares. Like it's up to you to get it right. It's up to you to get it right. And you don't have Zach Wilson at quarterback anymore, right? And so you're dealing with somebody who knows what it takes to win games. You're dealing with somebody who can put you in the right position. Work closer with that person, right? If the coaching staff can't help you, if the coaching staff can't figure things out, you figure it out with that person, right? And you put your own input. This is what I do well. I need to do this, right? I think there just needs to be grown-ups. Like they need to be adults in that room, particularly on offense. They need to be adults, right? Enough of like, oh, well, I'm waiting for Nathaniel Hackett to lead me around. Okay, it's not going to happen then. Okay, you figured it out on your own then. I think if they get Davante Adams, obviously a lot will change in terms of the way that offensive culture works. But I think from Davante Adams' career, you can learn what to do in those situations. Somebody like Garrett Wilson can learn what to do in those situations, right? Davante Adams, somebody who he had to deal with that same coaching as well, right? Obviously, it seems like it was a little bit better with the Packers, but I think for Davante Adams, what he did was, hey, I'm going to control what I can control. I'm going to become the best route runner in the NFL, right? I'm going to develop my game to an astronomical level, right? I'm going to get my details right. You're going to have no mistakes from me. And I'm going to make it to a point where it's almost impossible to not have me be a vital part of the offense, no matter what I'm doing, right? That's the mentality you have to have as a player, is I'm going to perfect my craft, and then you will have no choice but to build everything around me, right? I just don't think there's enough of that from the players. I think there's just too much of a reliance on like, the coach has to get me there. Like we know, we know that he can't really do that. And so you really got to start to figure it out on your own as a player. You really just got to perfect your craft. You really got to get the details right. And so you make it to a point where it's difficult for them to game plan poorly for you, right? In terms of utilizing you on offense or utilizing you on defense, you make it difficult for them to get it wrong as a player. And so, yeah, I just think that this is the mentality the Jets need. I think you've seen that from other teams, and I think it's important from the top down to get right there. You just got to stop operating as if I just don't want it to be my fault, and start operating as like we need to win a championship, and everything needs to be moving flawlessly, right? Because that's how you get to complementary football, not just offense, defense, special teams, complementary football with the coaching staff, complementary football with the front office. It all has to be complementary, and right now it's not. But that can quickly change. Winning cures all things, of course, but it's a winning formula from the top down. That's when you start to see how things flow correctly. And that's how all these championship teams go on runs for multiple years, right? Is they figure out that flow of, oh, okay, this is how my contribution works towards winning a championship, right? And not just, here's how I can explain myself to the media or to my friend on radio, right? Here's how I can make sure that he has no way to criticize me. No, that's a loser mentality. It's how can we work together to win a championship. So that's all I got this week. We'll be back next week. Hopefully we have an enjoyable Sunday or early morning with the Jets. It's going to be good to see Sam Darnold again. He's playing so well. It's really cool to see. But hopefully he plays terrible on Sunday. But yeah, I'll talk to y'all next time. Have a great weekend. Bye.